Okay, welcome to Diet for a Small Planet. I'm Andrea Fiorillo, the head of Research and Reader Services at Reading Public Library. A big thank you to the Friends of the Library who made tonight's event possible. And my co-host, our health and wellness librarian, Susan Beauregard, who can wave to you all, I hope. And also big shout outs to our partners, the Reading Community Television, Whiteland Books, and the Small Planet Institute. Like I said earlier, RCTV is broadcasting this event. Whiteland Books has copies of Diet for a Small Planet on sale. We can arrange to have them signed if requested. Susan is going to put their website up in the chat box and you can order things right from them. Don't do it during this program, but as soon as we're done. Our next author visit is August 11th with Summer Michaud-Skog, the author of Fat Girls Hiking, an inclusive guide to getting outdoors at any size or ability. Tonight, before we introduce Frances Moore Lappe, we're going to start with cooking demo with Lori Lambert-Osborne. Lambert-Osborne is an educator and wellness coach and Reading's all-time favorite dietitian. So Lori, please take it away.
Thank you, Andrea and Susan. One of my most favorite places to be, other than the kitchen, is the library. So this is a perfect match, perfect partnership. So I want to thank you for the invitation to bring you into my kitchen. We weren't anticipating that you would actually come into my kitchen, but it's the second best thing, right? So I would love to share with you one of the recipes from the book. And if you haven't already purchased this, like Susan put in the chat, you could order yours through Whiteland Books, is a local bookstore that I also love very dearly. So the recipe that I'm going to make today is actually listed under an appetizer. However, if you think of food the way I do, everything is a possibility for a meal. Meals can be, or dinners or lunches can be appetizers and vice versa. So I'm not going to say exactly what the recipe is, although I'll reference it's on page 206. So if you do have your book handy, it's 206, and I'll explain why I'm not telling you what the name of it actually is. So the recipe itself calls for 1 can of chickpeas, or garbanzo beans, or CC beans, as you may have heard. So I actually purchased these. And one of the things that I needed to do some preparation. So I have about 15 minutes to spend with you. So I had to do some of this ahead of time. So I'll explain what I've done ahead so that when you decide that you have to have this weekend, it's a perfect 4th of July fare, that you'll know exactly what you need to do. So I strained the chickpeas over a strainer and collected the kind of chickpea juice, if you will. Many of the things in the book talk about saving the liquid, and I am all for that. So save the chickpeas. I drain them, like I said. And once I drain them, I just put them in a bowl, and I'll explain what we'll do with them. And then I took the liquid and simmered it down. So this has already been simmered. And I'm just going to stir it up a little bit. And you can see, I think maybe it's not too much. I don't want to spill it, but you simmer it down till it's about 1/2 cup. And that condenses the liquid. And if you were in my house right now, you would have this aroma of beans. It's like this really lovely reduction, if you will, of the bean liquid. So that will take about 15 minutes. It depends on your stove. I have an induction stove, so things go a little bit faster, but the liquid again gets reduced to about 1/2 cup. Once it's cool, and the coolness is important as well, because I'm going to take mine and put it in a food processor. So I have my food processor here. So the liquid that has been reduced goes in. And the recipe calls for 3 garlic cloves. So I have my garlic cloves here. So I'm going to pop those in my food processor. A tablespoon of lemon juice, which I've already prepared. Now, this is a Lori adjustment to the recipe, so I hope that you don't mind. Because I juice the lemon, I also, anytime that has anything lemony in it, I like to zest the outside of the lemon to get a little bit more of that lemon flavor. I particularly like it. If those in your household don't, I wouldn't recommend it, but this is my lemon zest. And I'm putting that in the food processor. And then I'm going to add my bean reduction. So I'm just going to stir this up, pour it in. And then process. So it'll take a couple seconds. It'll be a little bit loud, so just 1 sec. Put it over here. Then what the recipe calls for is adding in extra virgin olive oil in a very slow, steady stream. It's important to add that in a slow, steady stream as to create an emulsion. You're making something of an aioli. So I have olive oil in this particular container, and I'm going to add it in really, really slowly. Now I'm going to add it in, the recipe calls for a certain amount of extra virgin olive oil. I would recommend adding to your liking, and you might find that the emulsion happens faster versus later. So feel free to adjust your olive oil as you would like. So I'm going to add this in as I turn the food processor on. And it actually looks like the consistency that I would like. Again, you can adjust this however you would like. I'm going to pour it into a clear dish so that you can kind of see what, oh, it smells divine. Oh my goodness. Whew. That extra lemon zest is perfect. So this is the consistency. Okay, I'll actually show you what it looks like. And the smell and the aroma is garlic and lemon. You do get a little bit of that chickpea smell as well, that bean smell, but it's not, because of the reduction, it's really quite enticing, captivating smell. So that's what you'll start with. So I'll start there. And then I've also prepared my potatoes and carrots. So the potatoes are 4 russet that you boil. So think potato salad. So I've diced these up and I've already boiled them and let them cool. Now there's 2 different ways to make this recipe in my, well, there's actually more than just 2 ways to make this recipe. If you cool the potatoes, the dressing that we just made that we're going to fold into the potatoes will actually coat. If you were to use that dressing while the potatoes are warm, the potatoes are going to soak up some of that dressing. So keep that in mind if you don't get a chance to cool your potatoes. I actually like to boil my potatoes early in the morning, let them cool and put them in the refrigerator so they're nice and cold. So that's what I did with these so that the dressing will get all over. So there's 4 russets that are cooked. They'll cook in on the stove for about 15 to 20 minutes. It depends on how small you dice them. I didn't want really huge chunks, but I didn't really want tiny ones either. And so you can see the size that I have, a great source of potassium, fiber. I kept the skins on. I always make potato salad with the skins on. So I would recommend that for that extra layer of fiber. I have my chickpeas already. So I'm going to take the chickpeas and pour it into my bowl that I'll be mixing. And as a suggestion, one of the mistakes that I used to make, maybe not a mistake, a learning opportunity, when I was a young cook, is that I never had a bowl that was big enough so that when I went to go mix things up, things were flying everywhere. So always err on the side of a bigger bowl, even if you decide that, oh, I don't need that big of a bowl. You'd be surprised that once you start mixing things up, things will be flying out and you want to contain it. So I've put this in a fairly large stainless steel bowl. The other ingredient is 1 carrot. This also has been cooked. It gets cooked with the potatoes, but not for the whole 15 to 20 minutes. Because carrots cook a little bit faster, you'll start the potatoes and then add the carrot in. And I dice this up a little bit smaller than the potatoes, but they're fully cooked. So I'm going to add that in. What I like about that is that it adds some color. It also adds some nutrition. So vitamin A, vitamin C. The other great ingredient is Petite Pea. So Petite Pea, the recipe actually calls for frozen, but peas are in season right now. So for a very short amount of time, fresh ones, at least local ones that I just actually got from our CSA. So you could add in snap peas like I just got from the CSA, but the recipe called, and I'm trying to honor the recipe. So we're adding those in. The benefit of that, as well as it adds fiber, adds some protein, and it adds some color. Then the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of sherry vinegar. So I'm going to pour that in. I'll show you the sherry vinegar that I'm using. So this is the version that I have, but any sherry vinegar that you have on hand would be great. If you don't have sherry vinegar and you'd like to add something different, feel free to experiment. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can vary this recipe. So before I put in the dressing, I'm going to stir everything up. So I would use a very soft spatula because I don't want to crush the potatoes. I just want to mix everything up very gently. Now the recipe also calls for 1/4 cup of fresh parsley. And I was blessed yesterday with a neighbor that had an excess, a bumper crop, if you will, of parsley. The recipe calls for garnishing the salad with the parsley. I was like, I've got a lot of parsley. I'm just going to add it in. Parsley is such a great herb. And if you've got an excess, why not just add it in? And that can coat all of that. So I just added my parsley. I'm going to stir that up as well. And I'll show you what it looks like before I put the dressing in. So you can kind of see how that mixture looks. I love cut up herbs in rather than on top as a garnish. I think the herbs really add a lovely texture and flavor. So now I'm going to add the dressing in. And the dressing can stay in the refrigerator, so you don't have to go crazy with it. You could use all of it, obviously. But depending on how everyone is in your house, they might not like it really wet. They might prefer it a little on the dry side. So again, you can customize how much you use. I clearly have got, I probably only used half. And I'm going to portion this out into a bowl so you can see what it looks like. And this is going to be part of my dinner this evening. So this is what it looks like when it's totally complete. Now you could, again, put some extra parsley. I'm all about eating with your eyes. So I might take some parsley and just give it a little cute little dab of that and put that on top just for some attractiveness. Now, I always look at a recipe as a blank slate, really, in particular when it uses beans. And the Diet for a Small Planet has so many recipes with beans that this particular recipe, you could turn this into 4 or 5 or more different recipes, just alternating your bean. So I want to show you a few other beans and a few other options. And if you have some varied herbs, you can do some different things. So if you were to use a black bean instead of the chickpea, you could change out the parsley for cilantro and have the same kind of feel, but it would be airing on more of a Mexican kind of flavor. You could also switch out some of the other vegetables and maybe put in some red peppers or whatever is in season at the farmer's market and make it that just a new version for that. Another option is a Central American red bean. And that would also give some color to it. So I might use maybe a cucumber in that what if I use the red bean and continue to keep the potato, maybe put in the carrot and alternate a different herb, whatever was in, maybe some mint would be really good with that. One of my favorites, small beans, small white bean or a cannellini bean, always makes me think of Italian flavors. So if I were to cook these up, I would put in basil. So I could put in some basil, I would have my cannellini bean and keep everything else the same. It would have more of an Italian flair. I might switch out the sherry vinegar for balsamic vinegar to give it that more Mediterranean kind of Italian feel. Again, you could use a red bean too. And a red bean to me does a lot of things. I think of it in minestrone with Italian, but I also think of it more of a Central American or Mexican kind of flavor. And if you do something like this and you wanted to go around toward the Italian flavor, you could add in some fennel to the bean as well, and maybe even some dill. So varying out your herb as well as varying out your bean will give you a whole host of different flavors and salads. And my last thing is, I didn't tell you the name. And one of the reasons for that is if I were to make this and call it a potato salad, specifically the person that I live with would say that's not a potato salad because they have it in their mind what a potato salad should be. So what we typically do in this household is I'll make something and deliver it to the table and then ask, what would you call it? What would you name it? Labels have very powerful, both positive and negative implications. So if your household thinks of potato salad a certain way, then have them name it and maybe call it the Sullivan potato salad or the Sullivan salad. And that could be your trademark salad that you enjoy as an appetizer, eating with crudité, or maybe even having as a lunch option. So I'd like to see if there's any questions before we transition, because sometimes there's questions about the food that I want to make sure that I'm honoring.
There was one question, Lori. Karen asked, what if you don't have a food processor?
Oh, great question. If you don't have a food processor, you could use a blender. The other thing you could really do too is if you had an immersion blender, you could do that. Let me show you what that looks like. Not everyone has one, but I love my immersion blender. You can put everything into the pot and then just immersion blend it. What I would recommend doing, either if you use the blender or this, is to cut up the garlic a little bit more than I just used a whole clove and put it in because I knew the food processor would deal with it. The blender probably would too. An immersion blender will get to it, but you want to start off with a smaller mince before you do that. That's a great question.
Okay, well, I think if there's not another quick question, we're gonna move on.
Yeah,
okay, so we're gonna give Lori some time to go put her moderator hat on because that's her next job. And I'm gonna tell you a few more things. So before I introduce the fabulous Frances Moore Lappe, I wanted to start our discussion on food justice and sustainability with the acknowledgement that the Reading Public Library stands on the ancestral lands of the Pawtucket Band of the Massachusetts tribe. The Pawtucket called this area home for thousands of years before English colonists claimed it. For more information on the Massachusetts people, you can go to their website. Susan is going to put that up in the chat box. And that brings us to our very esteemed guest, Frances Moore Lappe, who is the author of The Revolutionary Diet for a Small Planet, released last year in its 50th anniversary edition. She is also the founder of the Small Planet Institute, which Susan is going to put their website up in the chat box. She has authored or co-authored 20 books total, receiving a matching number of honorary degrees and untold awards. Moore Lappe's life work includes the fight to end hunger, poverty, and harmful farming practices. In exploring the root causes of these issues, she focuses on strengthening democracy and fostering the deep human need for connection, meaning, and power. Please welcome Frances Moore Lappe.
Oh, thank you so very much. Thank you. And I love the cooking demonstration. It's in the spirit very much of my own, really encouraging all of us to experiment and to just do it our way and keep trying, different cultures. I love it. I love it. It was beautiful.
Great. Well, Frances, first of all, I feel like I'm living a dream by even speaking to you. So thank you for sharing your love of all things food and even more than that. And we have a few questions for you tonight. So the first one is, since you wrote The Diet for a Small Planet in 1971, what changes have you seen in farming and food justice issues?
Oh, of course, the world has changed so much. And I try always to walk on both feet, if you will, of really grounding myself and facing the incredible steps that we've gone backward and worsened. I mean, I think hunger today is still 1/3 of our people on Earth don't have an adequate diet. 1/5 of very young children are stunted by malnutrition. I mean, yet we have increased food production per person by 20% since I began. So I think of climate catastrophe, which of course I didn't anticipate, and that production of food could be a major contributor, that 37% of greenhouse gases are in the production of our food. And yet we know that it's built so inefficiently that we are using 80% of our land, mainly that is going to livestock industry production, to give us less than 20% of our calories. So we are still moving in this very, very wasteful, and I could go on and on. I mean, species decimation, 1/2 of our insects are threatened. So I try to take that in, and yet, and I want to talk more about what hope means later, but yet, in my new chapter, I was so excited to share with everyone how many realizations and examples and just inspiring developments throughout the world. And one I write about that I was just looking at today in a new book that I was privileged to see recently about Indigenous practices. But I celebrate, for example, agroforestry, which when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet, I'd never even heard of. And now agroforestry, which is an indigenous practice, before monocultures and chemical corporate agriculture, integrated trees and food crops, and they, helped each other and on, and helped the climate, et cetera, et cetera. Now in Africa, there's an area that I estimated is about twice the size of Texas, which I grew up in, and I think it's pretty big. So that's pretty significant, that is regaining this. And it's a farmer teaching farmer how to move back into integration of trees and crops. And I could go on and on about just so many other things that lift me up every single day, including in our own country, the Alliance of Food Workers, and so many institutions, schools that are reconnecting with local farmers. And what is it? There are now just thousands of community gardens and farmers markets and community supported agriculture that I couldn't have imagined. So I think it's important. I know I've gone on and on, but I'm sorry, but to always, as we absorb these hard blows and hard truths, to celebrate the courage that we see all around us and the creativity. And I want to talk more about that.
Well, the creativity, I hope that we have opened that door to allow you to share with us some of that creativity that you see happening right now in front of us, so that, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves with the hope piece, but with that creativity, could you share some of those in the United States, what's happening here? You mentioned abroad.
Yes, one of the stories I tell in the new chapter that was so inspiring to me is Soul Fire Farm in upstate New York. Leah Penniman founded this a couple decades ago, I think now. And excuse me, Sherry, could you give me my little cup of tea? I have a little tickle here. So Soulfire Farm reaches out to African American community, and it's a way of relearning the indigenous practices. And she tells a story about the great grandmother who was her own family, who knew that she was going to be put into the bowels of a slave ship. And what did she do? She wove seeds. I get chills as I say this. She wove the local seeds in the African country she came from into her braids, and she brought them with her and helped to establish those crops here. And so Leah, out of this tradition, is teaching, and several thousand people have come through this, and most of them are now gardeners or farmers. So that story really lifts me up, as well as, as I was mentioning earlier, the here in the United States, the alliance with the food chain workers in, for example, this good food purchasing program, which enables schools and institutions to buy from local farmers. And then back internationally, I'm so lifted up by the fact that the Via Campesina, this alliance of farm workers movements throughout the world, it now has 180 organizations working together. And my daughter Anna and I got to go visit the example in Brazil 20 years ago, and it was life-changing. They were risking their lives to take this land. In the Constitution of Brazil, it says that the land must serve a social purpose. And yet there was all this land owned by the aristocracy that wasn't being used. And they risked their lives to follow the constitutional mandate and say, hey, we can make it useful. And so they sat in on the land, and some people lost their lives, but they succeeded. And now they train in agroecology, and they were spreading throughout the world. And let me just say that one of the big thrills is I follow the work of James Preddy. He's a professor who has a network around the world looking for sustainable farming systems. And he's found that just in the 20 years from 2000 to 2020, that the number of local farming using indigenous practices and building on what we're learning about agroecology, that they have grown from 500,000 such groups to 8 million such groups around the world in dozens and dozens of countries. And yet we never hear about this. So these are the kinds of things that I take with me on my dark days, of course, to bring to consciousness and to celebrate and to tell people about. And I thank you for listening.
Oh, gosh. Thank you for sharing those creative solutions and creative partnerships and bravery of people. And I want to take that's like a trend, because you're sharing some of the information that is the trends of things that are improving as well. I was wondering, there's the trend upwards sometimes, right? And there's a trend going backwards as well. Not that I want to balance this conversation. So what trends do you see that are going in the opposite direction from the trends that you had mentioned earlier?
Well, right now, a big part of my life energy is going toward a redefinition and rediscovering of the absolute necessity of democracy, what I call living democracy, a culture in which we each have a voice, meaning in our lives through that voice in connection with others, to create a world truly aligned with our nature, because we all need power, meaning, and connection. That's the human. Beyond the food, we need those. We need to have a voice. We need to feel connected to others, and we need meaning. And that is what is being robbed from us, from this very kind of nutty idea that, well, let me just say that a long time ago, I asked the question, why would this bright species be creating a world that as individuals, none of us would choose? Nobody gets up in the morning and says, yes, 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 I want another child to go hungry today, or I want to wipe out another species today. So how could it be? And so I answer that by, it's always a process, but I'm answering it by suggesting that our big brains are a big hazard in a way, because we see the world through culturally determined filters. The Hopi Indians put it, he who tells the story rules the world. And what story we have bought is life threatening. It is life killing. And that story is that we're just selfish little shoppers, right? That we're just selfish, materialist, competitive, and we have to turn over our fate to some kind of magical force. I mean, Ronald Reagan called the market magical. So we have to turn over our fate to some automatic trigger and believe in it and not be open to see that this market, there is nothing free about it. In our country, think of it. I mean, in every major part of our food system, there are a few corporations that are making the decisions for us and on which farmers are dependent. And we live in a society where now 3 billionaires control as much wealth as the bottom half of us. But in every major step in the food system, it's very tightly controlled. When I wrote Diet for a Small Planet, there were about 50 seed companies, for example. Now there's just a handful. So farmers have very little power. So I'm saying that we have to rethink our own capacities as human beings to create a democracy truly aligned with the earth and with our own needs. And we have to apply these beautiful concepts of democracy, of distributed power, of transparency. So we know what's going on, and the idea of mutual accountability. That has to include our economic life, including our agricultural life. It's not just who has power in the political system, because unfortunately, now that concentration of economic power is warping our political system. I learned that we have more agribusiness lobbyists in Washington, many more than oil and gas lobbyists. Who knew, right? And so they are keeping that infusion of private power over what could be a living democracy is what, no matter what we're doing with our lives, we can catch that and get excited about being part of transforming our own country into an example of real living democracy. Because now I think most Americans would be shocked to learn that we are behind dozens and dozens of other countries ranked in terms of the quality of our own democracy.
It's fascinating. That's fascinating. Thank you so much. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of question after question after question with that, great sharing of how that living democracy, which goes back to the motto of the institute that you founded, which is living democracy and feeding hope. And so your motto, you're living it, you're breathing it. And I was wondering how you would translate maybe just one piece, and I have other questions too, but one piece of that folks that are tuned in right now, that how can we live that out in a tangible way, that we live those values of, living democracy?
Well, I'll start with food again, because the reason I think that I at age 26, I jumped to food because I thought, oh, that's what we do every day, multiple times a day. We don't go shopping. I mean, we don't say, anyway, every day, multiple times a day, we are making the choice of what we put into our mouths, right? And so by making choices about what we eat that are aligned with the earth, already we start to feel more powerful. We're more aligned. We're more convincing to ourselves and to others. So walking that talk, if you will, but I don't even like that expression. It's really embodying what we're learning every day and knowing that every bite links us to all those producers. Almost a half of farmers are now poisoned by pesticides every year. So if we choose organic, hey, we're sending the signals out to get rid of that so they're not poisoned. So that is one part of living democracy. And then it is, I think we're social creatures and we need buddies. And since courage is the key to doing what we thought we could not do, find one or two buddies who also get it, that are, we have to go deeper in our understanding. It's not just about voting. Voting is critical more than ever, but it is the way we live together and all the rules around our decision-making, getting that private wealth out of our political system. So finding a buddy who's really excited about that too. And on our website, smallplanet.org, you can link to another website that we were very proud to co-create with a huge network of organizations. It's called democracymovement.us. So it's democracymovement.us is the way I think of it. And there you can go right to your state and you can see what are the big groups right now that you can take part in and support and tell your neighbors about and maybe contribute to. So I think that this idea, it's thrilling to not just feel a victim. and recognizing that we can't do this alone, reaching out, all it takes, I think, one buddy to share ideas with, and then see if you can get others engaged in that exciting interconnection between food, farming, and our democratic process. It's worked for me. I can say that.
Yes, and I love that interplay, and I too share your starting point of food. It's, we commune together with food. We, if someone is sick, we deliver food. Food is love, food is gifts, and so forth. So it's a great entryway for many people. And once they have a chance to read your book and reflect on some of those, that interplay that you talk about is like this rope that has so many parts to it that are intertwined. And I was wondering if you could spend some time talking about the interplay of hunger, climate change in particular, because at the time of writing the book, that wasn't as paramount as it is now. So adding in some of those other interplays that you mentioned, or that you may not have mentioned yet, could you speak to that?
Yes, well, let me just go back to the basics here, that because of our grain-fed, meat-centered diet, and we are now continuing to eat more meat per capita in the world, that there's such inefficiency, number one, because as I said, 80% of our land produces only 18% of our calories because of this waste. And so as we begin to choose a plant, I like to say plant and planet-centered diet now, we know that right there we are reducing greenhouse gas emissions that are now, the whole food system can contribute as much as 37%. And one estimate is that if we moved to the plant-centered eating, that we could reduce agricultural greenhouse gas emissions by about 70%. One scholar estimated it would be like taking all the vehicles off the road, and including the planes and ships and everything. It would be huge. So that is something that I don't think people appreciate, how much power we have just in that key element in our lives. And so I would just really emphasize that, and this idea that to the democracy piece of it, as we learn, and I think we absorb this through really tying our imaginations into where our food is coming from and who our choices are affecting in the world. As I mentioned, if we're choosing organic, then we're sparing someone of being exposed to pesticides. What a wonderful thing. And so then how do we change the rules? That then is our citizenship piece. And there, I'd like to introduce the concept of, I discovered a long time ago that I didn't need to call myself an optimist. That's pretty hard for a lot of us right now. And I realized that, wait a minute, human beings, we don't need certainty of success. We need the sense that maybe our acts can matter, that they can ripple out. And actually, I've said the only choice we don't have is whether to change the world, because every act we make is rippling out, in either for the negative or the positive. And so I've stressed this idea that it is not possible to know what's possible now. We have humanity, our species had never been at this point. I think of it as this giant storm in which the biggest trees are just crashing. And what we can see are the roots for the first time. And so it's kind of hard to say that it's impossible or that it is, because we've never been here before. And more people are awakening and finding their courage. And again, I think that we maybe emphasize that, oh, we've just got to be good people. Right now, yes, we good people making ethical choices, but we've got to do what we thought we could not do. And so I used to, I guess I changed desk. I don't have her up there anymore, but Eleanor Roosevelt said, do one thing every day that scares you. And so, even talking about these questions and looking for that buddy or buddies with you, that can be kind of nerve-wracking, right? Because it might not click for the other person, and we don't like rejection, right? So I think this idea, though, of we don't have to be optimists, that all that's required is that we see that, yes, it is possible that our acts in this time of absolute, our planet has never faced what we are today. So it is not possible to know what's possible. More and more people are waking up, as I was beginning to describe.
Thank you so much for saying that, and letting us feel your, not, I'm going to call it optimism, but the power of the ripple, that all these actions that we do have an effect that we might not necessarily see on the other side, and that's okay. One of the things that you also brought up in the book that I'm curious about is hunger, because food insecurity right now is one of the highest that it's ever been in history. So the book talks about that in relationship to food policy as well as choices. What can you suggest that's different than some of the other things, or in addition to some of the other suggestions that you've made, that we can help in that regard to start improving food insecurity and hunger?
Well, there are really two very distinct types of hunger in the world. That we are here in the United States, this highly concentrated chemical corporate system has created one kind of hunger. 60% of our calories now have no nutrition. And I just read a new statistic today that some people are saying that 90% of what our children eat is junk food. I haven't fact checked that, but so that is a kind of hunger that leads to disease. That diet is now a factor in most non-communicable diseases. So that is a type of built-in hunger, even if we're putting a lot of food in our mouths, but we're hungering for healthy food. And then there is the absolute absence, as I was saying, 1/5 of our children in the world are stunted. And that's not just being short. That is a condition for life that imperils people. And so that is worsened then by climate change. And I think that everything we can do to convince all of our efforts worldwide in terms of offering assistance, to be supporting the local initiatives, not to come in with our monocultures. No, and that's what my colleague Tim Wise has written a book that Eating Tomorrow, and talks about how our corporate chemical system is still being pushed throughout the world. We must stop that. We must stop that, and rather support the kinds of things that I was describing in Africa, for example, with the spread of agroforestry, the indigenous methods that are being revived, and supporting people who are right there on the land, and these groups that are sprouting. And So it's a very different way of thinking about, oh, we've got modern agriculture. Let's go show them how. No, it's the opposite of that. How can we be learners and supporters of what is working throughout the world? And that means, of course, again, back to our political system. Who is guiding, whether it's USAID or other instruments of our government? Who's talking? Who has their ear? As I said, agribusiness lobbyists are even much, much more than the oil and gas industry lobbyists. So those are some of my thoughts in how we shift the idea of help. The idea of help is that understanding the answers are out there. They're being born every day. I was in in India not too long ago, where I met women who had totally transformed. Now about 75 villages going from absolute hunger. And they just got together at night after their kids were in bed and started their saving circles and transformed from a white rice diet to a millet and just a variety of crops in each acre. And they got their own radio station with government support finally after a lot of work. And it's succeeding. And now they're traveling to different parts of the world. These were the poorest, the Dalit women in India, who you may know is the lowest caste, terrible system. And yet they transformed their lives. And I've got to tell you about one moment as I was leaving one of the villages that is such an exemplar of this. It's called the Decon Development Society, about 100 miles from Hyderabad. And the women rushed after me. They rushed after me as I was moving toward the taxi. And they said, wait. We forgot to tell you the most important thing. What we found in our women's group was our courage, And every time I get discouraged, I think of, that for that, you asked me about what kind of help, that it's not showing the Decon Development Society how to operate, but it is really now India is in the same area now. Government money is going to support ecological practices, and in Mexico as well, and other countries. Thailand is an example. So that's what we need to be helping. Yeah.
I love that story. Thank you for it. It's actually welling up courage, I think, probably in most of the people listening.
I need to. So yeah, we'll talk about courage because then I've got to show up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So living democracy and feeding hope is the motto of the Institute. Before we open it up for people in the audience to ask some questions, I was wondering if you would share with us you mentioned some initiatives on your website with linking with other things, but what is the Institute, some new things going on there, new exciting projects that you're working on that you'd like to share with us?
Well, one of the things that we've taken up is the crisis of trust, we call it. And we're going to be issuing a report about what other democracies are doing. We can't have a democracy with no trust, and trust is breaking down throughout the world, and trust in government, understandably, is going down here. And so any of you out there who would like to, it's one of the hardest projects I've ever taken on, but we're finding examples of other democracies scored much higher than we are on quality of our democracy, who are coming up with very interesting ways to create very transparent systems for identifying lies and disinformation. And so that is critical, because now in this new world of social media, when we all are hearing different news and divided up by that, because there's so much disinformation, that is one big project that we're taking on. And please let us know if you'd like to see that report. It's going to be out in the next couple months. Yeah.
And so that if folks were interested in that, they could have access to that if they were to go onto the website of the Institute?
Yes. And actually, any of you who would like to look at the draft, it's very much a draft, but we're going to turn it into official looking report. It's called Crisis of Trust: How Are Democracies Protecting Against Dangerous Lies? Please, we would I think we'd feel comfortable about sharing what we have found and get your ideas. So, but that is our urgent question, because truth telling lies underneath all solutions. If we don't trust each other, we cannot solve these deep problems. And disinformation is a great killer of trust.
It's very true. It's very true. Thank you so much. So I would love for anyone that has questions, and Andrea and Susan also can help in this regard. If anyone would like to, first of all, put anything in the chat, you're more than welcome to do that, as well as unmuting or maybe raising a hand on your camera, so that if we had multiple hands go up, we can pick the person to ask Frances a question.
While we wait for people to think about their questions, I have a question for the audience. If you can courageously turn your video on for a moment, I would love to see a show of hands. How many of you first encountered Diet for a Small Planet when you were in the 70s when it originally came out? Okay, I see 1, 2, 3. I don't see a lot of cameras on, but I see 3 people waving at me. How many of you first encountered it in the 1980s? Was anyone around for the 1980s? Would we all like to forget it? I don't know. How about in the 1990s? Did any of you first read this book in the 1990s? I see 1 hand. How about the 2000s? I see 1 hand. How about the 2010s? I see another hand. And has anyone just discovered it for the first time with the 50th anniversary edition? I know I have. I knew all about it. I just hadn't actually read it, but I admired it from afar. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anyone have a live question they want to ask? And don't be shy about using the chat either. Michelle, you have something?
How do you have any tips on, especially like the younger crowd, maybe sometimes the older ones, for impatience? They just don't, how can I say it? They want things instantly, and not everything goes instantly. And, you know, progress is slow sometimes. And, you know, how can you keep things steady and moving in the positive direction? Especially when you don't see immediate change.
Very, very important. Well, I think return to the theme of this idea that every choice we're making each day is rippling out, and to really, you know, find others who have that sense that we know it's true, but we can't always see what those positive ripples are. And so I think that's really important to cultivate. I also think it's that the excitement of learning and doing what we thought we could not do is so thrilling, exhilarating. And that is what I think keeps a lot of people together in this democracy and this very exciting food movement as well, because they're in the food movement more than the democracy movement, understandably. There are very specific things that we can see, the changes, whether it's a community garden beginning or our school lunches actually being procured from local farmers. They're very specific things. And then on the democracy movement front, I know that a lot of the news to a lot of us has been very terrifying recently. And fear can stop us, or it can really trigger that, okay, I'm going to find my courage and follow what Eleanor Roosevelt told us. Again, so I think it's a desire for a life that I think most all of us want, to have that deeper meaning and to feel that we get up every day knowing that maybe we alone can't change the world, but we never know who's watching, and we never know if one thing can lead to another and another and another. So that possibilism, that sense of possibility, is the absolute key. And again, in community, I think it's very hard to keep that alive by oneself. And that's why this Democracy Movement website we created, and there are just so many great ways to connect locally with community gardens and farmers markets and Food Chain Workers Alliance, and really supporting people who are in the food system. So it's kind of wide open. So I'm just hoping that all of us can maybe, I guess I'll close that question or that answer by what worked for me, and I was so fortunate, is that I found my question early in life. My question: why is there hunger? Is it really true that there's not enough food? And so if each of us can say, okay, what question is my question? That is a really important question, and I can dig into it and find some way that I can connect to it at all these levels of changing the relationships of concentrated power and blindness and destruction to shared power, transparency, and mutuality. As Rabbi Heschel put it, some are guilty, but we're all responsible. So I think that spirit is finding your question. What is it that could really catch your imagination?
Thank you,
Thank you, Frances. There was a question in the chat about veganism and what your thoughts are on veganism.
Well, I'm not a vegan, but I'm becoming closer to one. I joke sometimes that I could be a vegan, except I love Parmesan cheese too much. But now I was just reading, somebody asked me the difference between oat milk and cow's milk in greenhouse gas emissions. And I was doing that research, and I thought, whoa, I've got to really become more toward a vegan, and at least to give up the milk in my coffee. So I honor vegans, and I think I honor them for many reasons. One, when I was young, it was all about avoiding cruelty to animals before we knew all these other things. And I honor that. And I want to become more and more. I think it's also, though, really important to keep that big tent and not to wag fingers and say, oh, you're not quite up to speed here, and to embrace any and all of the changes that we're making in our lives that move us in the right direction, and not just guilt trip each other. That doesn't work. It's welcoming. And that's why I think the recipe and just welcoming people into a kitchen where it's more fun to cook, because you have more variety in the plant world. People say, oh, didn't you give up a lot when you stopped eating meat? And I said, no. I started discovering the world where all the flavor and the differences in color and texture and cultural cuisine is in. So I think that's really my response.
Frances, I want to piggyback on your milk question.
Oh, good.
Nowadays there's oat milk, there's cashew milk, there's almond milk, there's coconut almond milk, there's dairy, cow's milk. If you were to recommend, and I know it's not an all or nothing, it's a continuum, right? How would you rank them, and what is a better choice for not only maybe nutrition, but for health, for the planet, and for ecology?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert, but I understand my limited knowledge, and I think a lot of us know this, that, for example, almonds use a lot of water all over but even that is more complicated, because it is really the life cycle of an almond tree doesn't compute to be such a negative. So that's a little bit stretched in people's mind about the water cost of almond, at least. But I'm just not an expert. I just know that comparing dairy and um, oats, obviously dairy has all of that grain-fed, grain feeding going into them and all the methane and everything. And so, of course, in that comparison, oat milk wins big time. I had the numbers in my head, but I've lost it. But it's a really big difference. And so I want to look into that more, though, because I know a lot of us, like me, like our cream and our whitener of some kind in our coffee and such. So, but thanks for the question.
Yeah, you're welcome. And there's another one in the chat that, can you tell us more about what your institute does?
Oh, well, our institute, I founded it. Let me just give you a little history. In the 90s, I had an organization called the Center for Living Democracy in Vermont. And when I moved to Cambridge, I really wanted to, that was in 2000, I wanted to blend my life and continue the food and farming walk that I was on and the living democracy piece together. And so my daughter and I traveled the world. Can you imagine, all you parents out there? You can trust me, and I'm sure you would agree. Traveling the world with my daughter was in grad school, and we traveled on 5 continents, and got to know the most courageous people working the land, and creating this aligned food systems that we've been talking about today. We got to meet Wangari Maathai, who won a Nobel Prize for her Greenbelt movement. And so we traveled the world, and we were so moved by what we learned. And we came home with new hope. And even we looked at each other and we said, wait, all these people we've interviewed, that's how we met the landless workers in Brazil, for example. All these people, they're facing the biggest obstacles on the planet. And yet they seemed the most hopeful. They seemed the most energized. How could that be? And we said, it's because hope is not what we find in the evidence, in the books. It's what we become in action together. And so that was then, I wanted to be a weaver. I wanted to find people who were excited about weaving the pieces together, the democracy and rethinking democracy as a way of life, as a rewarding, thrilling way of life, and the food and farming piece. And so we've continued and you'll see on our website, to weave all that together. And a big turning point for me, I'll share about this theme of doing what you thought you could not do, because in 2016, I joined this march of 100 miles. And I didn't think I could walk 10 miles. And I thought I'd be the little old lady they'd take off in a cart, But I walked for democracy. And it's called Democracy Spring. And we sat in on the Capitol steps, and we were arrested and put into a detention center. But it was life-changing. It was life-changing. That thrill of democracy as we approached the Capitol, and the Capitol came into focus. I had the realization, those people in those gorgeous buildings, they work for me. They work for us. And it was just this shift of energy and thought pattern that, I'm not just a victim of their concentrated power. So I'm just telling that story because it was, in my case, probably the most kind of like, should I do this? Am I crazy? And so doing what we thought we could not do. And then it helped me weave together and be more believer in the small planet mission, that we can weave these various themes into our lives and find new meaning, new connection, and new voice.
That sounds like a very powerful turning point, and so many little stopping points along the way that energized you just when you needed it. What in the Green New Deal movement, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, the Green Belt movement?
Yeah.
Well, Wangari Maathai, she grew up in a very poor, she passed away in 2013. She was my hero of all heroes. She grew up in a very poor village. She went to school where she was not allowed to speak her native language. And yet, Wangari said, I saw the trees being destroyed. I saw Kenya. This is Kenya. We met with her in Nairobi. The trees, the forest being destroyed. And she knew from every level the indigenous diet had been robbed, through the monocultural chemical agriculture. And she organized to create a green belt movement where women were trained, and it didn't take a lot of training, but to have tree planting in village after village after village throughout Kenya. And then it became, it spread to other countries. And that, when we interviewed her, and she met every obstacle, she was beaten, she was jailed, she was humiliated. And I said, Wangari, how do you keep going? And she said, well, you just keep walking. And then she stopped, smiled, and said, but sometimes you've got to jump. And she introduced us to Reverend Timothy Njoya, who remade fear for Anna and me. He said to us in our gathering with Wangari, he said, people don't understand. Fear is pure energy. We can do with it as we choose. And he got up and he acted out this scene where he said a lion doesn't just see the predator and jump, or the prey and jump. It channels its energy and it focuses that energy, and then it goes. And we can do that. Fear is pure energy. And so one day when I was in an audience and I was really scared about asking a question, as a lot of people are, I realized my heart was pounding, and I remembered Timothy Njoya, Reverend, and he said, oh, fear is pure energy. And I thought, oh, that's pounding heart is just my inner applause telling me that if I stand up and raise my hand, I'm doing the right thing. And so I got my hand up. I didn't get called on, but it was that spirit of reinterpreting fear. And so the Greenbelt movement stands then for me for all of that. And I understand when Wangari got the call that she had won the Nobel Peace Prize, all the people in her car who'd been working with her, she said, we won. So she was my hero of heroes.
Such a wonderful story. And I think all of us will actually take that with us, that when we get fear, we feel that fear, we'll hear your words, which are translated from your role model, that it will call us to use that energy in a positive way, or in some way that we know can ripple things forward.
Indeed, because all of our ripples have one consequence or another. We're all, I quoted a friend of mine, now deceased, Hans-Peter Durer, who said, in life, there are no parts, there are only participants. So.
That's great.
If no one else has a question right now, I would love to hear more about the trees, the mixture of the trees and crops, and also just like the wisdom of the three sisters planting crops together that feed the soil and help each other out, and sort of how, am I too quiet?
That's better.
How is that? Okay. So what I was saying is, one of the topics that fascinates me, I mean, you have so many good stories in this book and in person, Francis, but one of the things that really fascinates me right now is how plants take care of each other and communicate, and how nature knows how to grow itself with only a little bit of assistance from humans, and that we often mess that up. And so I want to hear more about how it works with the trees and the crops, and how something like the three sisters of crops that grow symbiotically together and make for better food sources for all of us. Could you speak to that some?
Yes. I'm just so excited about agroforestry. And in Niger, You see, the French colonials had a system in which ended up chopping down millions of trees. And so there were, in Niger, there were stumps that no one thought could regrow, but they do if they're left alone. And so the families in the villages began to just stop trimming those trees that had been cut down, stopped limiting their growth, and they regrew. Largely, that's what happened in Niger. And over about a 20-year period, they grew like a couple hundred million trees, and had food enough to feed 2.5 million more people. And the beauty of it is that you think about it, it's so obvious that the leaves, one, in the warm African climate, that it shades the soil so it doesn't dry out as fast. And the leaves become fodder for the animals, and they also become fertilizer for the soil. And so the weaving together of the crops, and also using green manure, Roland Bunch, a friend who's an agronomist there, calls it, I guess a lot of people do, but using multiple crops and cover crops, and pigeon peas, for example, a crop that is very, very nutritious and fertilizes the soil, helps the nitrogen content. And so there are just so many elements that are working together. And I quote in the book a little boy who said, well, why do I like this so much? Why do Roland asked him, well, what does this mean to you? And he said, well, it just means to me, if I'm hungry and my mom, doesn't have anything, I just go out and get some fruit off the tree. So, but it's such a beautiful example of really aligning and working with and learning from the natural world, learning what the plant's like, not this, what we've learned here is this, with our big machines and our monocultures, we're going to come in and make a lot of money. No. We are going to inhabit with the earth. And I think that's why I'm just so excited by Jules Pretty's work about this just rapid spread of these local groups that are working in sustainable farming.
I just want to add a couple of book recommendations, because I wouldn't be a good librarian if I didn't, but a great work of fiction that just is fascinating about how plants communicate and trees, especially, is the Overstory by, oh my goodness, what's his name? Tim, I'm blanking on his name, but he won a Pulitzer for it, and it's a bestseller. So the Overstory. And then another bestseller, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is about indigenous knowledge and how smart they've been about food sources and keeping the air and the water clean so that we thrive.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. Excellent.
Have we inspired anyone to take any fear that they have as energy to ask a question to Frances?
I could identify, but the pure energy is there. I'm curious, are there things that you were surprised that, are you, or just doesn't quite make sense? Anything that you felt like I jumped over? I mean, obviously, I jumped over a lot.
There was one question in the chat where someone asked, food allergies are on the rise in the US. In your global travels and research, are you seeing the same increase in food allergies globally?
I really don't know, but I do know that, that that it's not surprising at all to me, because of one would think that, food allergies are imbalanced internally, obviously. And then if about 60% of our calories don't even provide any nutrition. And we know that, that our foods have been designed, these fast foods have been designed to just hook us like an addiction, that's a setup for food allergies. And not to mention, of course, farm chemicals that I would imagine must play a role, because the exposure we're getting to dangerous chemicals. I mean, glyphosate, for example, which is coupled with GMOs, which that are corn and cotton and soy. That has been limited because it is so harmful. In I think 40 countries have limited it, and some have banned it, and we haven't. And so we have no idea what really the consequences are. I talked to one scientist who said the studies are so loosey-goosey, that we haven't come to terms with this. Although Monsanto, now Bayer, did have to pay out billions of dollars for damages to farmers who got cancer. So no, I'm not an expert in any way on allergies, but my strong hunch is that it is all related to what we're talking about today. And as far as other countries, I think, I really don't know, but I'm going to find out after this. I'm curious myself. And that actually that the chemicals, change the DNA of the plants. So, gosh, that is, it just as a layperson, it would seem like there has to be a very strong connection.
I have another question then. If a young person came to you and asked, what can they do as a young person to make a difference, what would you tell them?
Well, I typically go back to that one line of find your question. What pricks your curiosity? What makes you want to know more? What mystery is there that you think you could help to understand and find a step that you could take that would have meaning? Because that then it's not just telling them, oh, go do that, right? But what triggers your curiosity? I think curiosity is incredibly powerful. At least it started me. I tell students that I made a C on my first English paper in college. So I never thought I'd be a writer. But when I had to answer a question, why is there hunger? Oh, I wanted to share that. I had to share it. I never thought I could write a book. I was terrified. But I think that's really not randomly thinking, we do think what's really important, yes. But what is our question about the most important things? And how is it connected to me? And I believe curiosity is what I encourage, rather than saying, oh, you should start here. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Frances, I have one other question related to when you wrote the books. That was a while ago.
No.
Since it's been 51 years, is there a challenge that is still persisting and really hasn't budged since then? I know that we talked about some things that have improved and some things that may have regressed. But is there anything that has stayed the same that is just not giving?
Well, the core that is stuck, in my view, is this grasping of what is democracy and the mythology that we have in this country that is such an obstacle, that we're the best and that that we're one of the leaders. We are not. And so I think that is what is stuck, and not realizing. And this is why I love being an elder. I love being able to look back and to say that my generation, we saw every income group double its real family income. And we saw this enormous, we cut poverty rate in half during the year I was, 10 years that I was working in the war on poverty. Not all of that time I was there, but I was contributing. That we have shown that we know how to do democracy better than we do now. And so I think the biggest obstacle is our mythology around our power structure, and now the attack on it, the moving away from trusting people's voice and trusting people's rights, and through suppression of voting, through gerrymandering, denying people equal voice, and through allowing money in politics, that is the stuck part. And so I want to really share the news that we have done better in the past. We have, as we stood up in the 60s and made some significant changes, and after, and in the 70s as well. And so I think, especially for the younger generation, it's hard to believe that we could have made those huge shifts, both in civil rights and in awakening around the first Earth Day, for example. So I just want to underscore that our history shows that we do know a better way, and but now we have to really rethink what democracy means, to embrace the earth, embrace our economic lives as part of our understanding of democracy. It is not simply a political question. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that.
I don't think we have any more questions, but Willa in the audience has a wonderful way to take us out. So first, I am going to give my gratitude to Lori and to Francis and to Whiteland Books and the Small Planet Institute and RCTV and all of you for showing up to talk about these really vital issues tonight. And I don't know Willa, but the lovely Willa from the audience says to Francis, I want to thank you for being an amazing motivational speaker. I think we become braver about expressing what is important to us as we get older, which I prefer to call maturity. You have surely motivated us to follow our dreams of making our planet a healthier and more beautiful place to live.
Oh, thank you. That's so lovely. Can I share with you, I know we're closing, very brief quote that stays with me forever is William Hastie, the first African-American federal judge, who said, democracy is not being, it is becoming. It is easily lost and never fully won. Its essence is eternal struggle. And then I hear John Lewis tell me the good fight, the good struggle. So that is the spirit in which I hope we can all join together. And I just want to thank you so much. I hope you can tell how much I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much, Francis.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thanks again. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
All right.
So,
Well, Francis, I hope you have rested up, and I'm so glad that you got to join us. And if Sherry is still there, thank you for
here.
all your help.
I so wanted to meet you in person. I was so devastated that didn't work out. But
Well, I live right in Cambridge, so I might stop by the Institute sometime.
oh yeah, you should, please. It's
And
so easy to get to us. We're right next. We're 120 steps from the T-stop.
yeah, I love your work, so I would be thrilled to get to stop by sometime.
Oh, do please, please.
And Lori and I are considering maybe doing another sort of plant-based program to sort of do a deeper dive where we do a lot of exploration of climate justice and the climate crisis at the library. And this piece of it is so important and something that we all have control over in our lives. So hopefully we'll keep it going.
I think for all of us, the climate crisis is so terrifying. And as we can come together around food and food that is making a difference and addressing, it is just so nourishing in every way, you know. So that's beautiful. And I hope we get to meet someday in person.
I hope so too. And I had heard about Soulfire Farms.
Oh, you had?
Before reading your book. And then I also wanted to say there's this immigrant farm collaborative called Mentor Farms in central Massachusetts.
Oh, wonderful. Mentor.
Mentor, like mentoring, to put on your radar too.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much. And Laura, you were just fantastic, the questions, and I kind of went off in different directions, but they were great questions, and I thought it felt like a real conversation. I hope you did.
Yeah, no, it was an honor, like I said, and I think people needed to hear your experience and how, you know, you went in different directions, because everyone has a different door, a different entryway into this arena. And so by providing that, I think you opened doors for people to enter into this discussion. So it was great.
Thank you, Lori. All right, so have a good evening and know that you're very appreciated.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for your work.